Hey, I'm Aleesha Bake.
I'm Jen Greenfield.
And I'm Jen Tophoney. VO Booth Besties listen to the questions you have.
We find pros in the know to help you learn.
And connect with our amazing VO community. Welcome to VO Booth Besties.
Welcome, everyone, to VO Booth Besties. I've been pinging people like crazy, so if you don't see someone you know, ping them and invite them into the room. Like our intro said, we are here to help working voice actors get your most important question answered by industry pros who know. Each week, we'll have a new topic and a guest speaker who is an expert on that topic. You can submit your questions through our website, boothbesties.com, and we'll do our best to include them in our interview. Unfortunately, we are missing a bestie this week. Aleesha had a prior commitment, but she is with us in spirit. A quick bit of housekeeping. In order to stay on topic and get as many of your questions answered as we can, we're going to keep hand raising turned off. However, the chat will remain open, so if any questions come to mind, pop them in there and JT will be monitoring that. Now, without further ado, let's meet our guest. Over to you, JT.
Thank you, NJ. This week, we are honored to interview Scott McCarthy. With 18 years at the company, Scott McCarthy is the head of dubbing for DreamWorks Animation. Scott oversees DreamWorks dubbing for Netflix, Amazon, Hulu, Peacock, as well as projects for parent company Comcast and NBC Universal across more than 30 languages worldwide. He's also the chair of the Entertainment Globalization Association's EGA Awards Committee, and he's responsible for launching the first global peer-reviewed awards program in the industry. Scott is an advocate for the localization industry and believes in a more collaborative and creative forward approach to dubbing. I can't wait to hear more about dubbing and localization at DreamWorks. Thanks, Scott. You're up, NJ.
All right. Scott, are you ready? Let's jump in.
Wow, that was impressive. You guys are definitely professionals at this, and I feel like I do not have the voice to match up to you guys, but I will. That's why I'm behind a desk and not behind a microphone.
Leave it to us. Well,
All
honestly,
right.
we are so very glad you're here. Oh my gosh, we've got a great room of people with us. So, I know you and I could fill a 5-hour room if someone gave us a chance, but we'll try to keep this, be mindful of everyone's time. So let's start easy. What is dubbing?
I would say dubbing is, in the most simplest way I can answer that question. It's bringing, at least in my case, it's bringing the domestic version to life in upwards of 30 plus languages.
Okay. I mean, that makes sense, but just for anyone who just didn't know, it's kind of nice to just let's start from, fundamental dubbing. Yeah. Okay. What is dubbing? So for you, to your point, when we're talking about dubbing at DreamWorks, we're actually talking about converting English-speaking films to another language, another local to another country, correct?
Absolutely, because dubbing, you're right. This is where we can go on for way too long because you get me to go too deep on some of this, and I'll talk your head off. But there's this trend, and what most people are familiar with dubbing, if they're if they're U.S. based and they're absorbing dubs and content, say on Netflix or other platforms, we're seeing a lot of stuff coming from foreign countries and being dubbed into English, and we're even seeing crazy matchups where we are getting a source language dubbed into another source language, going from like a Japanese to German, or just random pairings that you wouldn't always think would be the case and haven't been the case, but only because of the advancements in our industry and access to, although we need more access to quality translators when it comes to the language skills that are needed for some of these cross language dubs that are being requested and ordered. I have it a little bit simpler because for my specific workflow at DreamWorks, I am simply taking a domestic English version of something and translating it into about 30 plus languages. So what I'm doing feels very simple compared to some of the things that are happening industry-wide, not just in things dubbing from a foreign country into English, but also some of these random pairings that we're seeing.
Okay, so So these 30 different languages. So talk to us, because I know this is very important to you, and I think it's fantastic. Explain to everyone in the group, what does localization mean, and why is it important to you? Why is it important to DreamWorks?
I think for me, I call upon my marketing background. So I've been at DreamWorks, 18 plus years now, and most of that tenure was actually doing marketing, doing publicity and promotions and consumer products and a lot of brand work. And it's only the past, about 8 years that I've been doing localization. And I really call upon that marketing background and apply it to what I do today. I tell my team, don't think of yourselves as a dub team, think of yourselves as a brand team. Our job is to protect the brand of DreamWorks in all of these languages. So we are taking this vision of a filmmaker who made this English domestic version, and we have to adapt it into 30 different languages. And there's so many creative choices that go into that. And, we can get into deeper conversations about, filmmaker involvement and what that should look like. But the reality is, dubbing and localization has kind of been seen as like a afterthought or a post-production type file you just order. And I think if filmmakers knew like the liberties we have to take with their product in order to adapt it, to make jokes work, to make translations work, and to fit within cultural requirements and the like, there's just so many creative choices that are made. And when you're given that responsibility, either with or without filmmakers, to take that to a market, you're responsible for protecting that brand. And DreamWorks is a company that values itself and prides itself in the brand that it's built up over the years. So to be asked in my current role to kind of look after that in all these countries around the world, it's something I take very seriously.
So just to be clear, because I just want to restate it, and this will tie into the next question I have. Localization for DreamWorks is using actors, using voices in their country, their home country. Is that a good way to explain localization?
Yeah, and of course, there's an exception and caveat to
Right.
all of this,
Okay.
but I think that our approach and the DreamWorks approach, and many major studios take this as well, which you really have to lean on the local countries.
Right.
Language is I always describe language as being evolving. And if you are bilingual and you come from another country and you bring that language with you to the States, you now live here, your language in some ways is frozen in time, because if you're not living in that country where you came from, you're not adapting to all the changes that are happening, all the new slang, all the new terms, that language is constantly evolving.
Right.
And you really have to have someone in the market doing the adaptation, opposed to kind of hiring translators and voice actors here in the States to bring an international version to life, for the simple fact that you want to honor the language and culture that you're trying to take that product to.
Okay. So one of the, well, the main mission that VOBB really focused on is being very honest and clear and concise with members, because we just get, there's, of course, welcome to the internet. Yeah, I mean, you can Google anything and get any kind of answer. But what we want to do is, in here, when we're talking about voiceover, when we're talking about dubbing with DreamWorks, like, I want to be very clear, and for people to not kind of feel like there's that dangling carrot. When DreamWorks Animation dubs a film and they're using localization, it's not the same as being bilingual. Like, I just want to kind of reiterate that. It's not that you could just, go down, you could go to your talent roster of people in LA and be like, oh, they speak Portuguese and we want to do that. That's not what we're doing here. That's not what DreamWorks is doing.
Well, let me answer that by giving you one really big and recent exception,
Okay.
which is Antonio Banderas. So I we just had a Puss in Boots movie come out. I don't oversee the dubbing on that feature. Let me just say that
Okay.
first and foremost. But because that's handled by Universal, NBC Universal owns DreamWorks Animation, and that goes through the feature division at Universal. However, I mean, we've dubbed Shrek and Puss in Boots going back decades now, and Antonio Banderas does the Spanish versions as well as the Italian versions, and a lot of that is because uh, he is still very I don't know if embedded is the right word, but he is still connected to those cultures and to those languages, and because of the star power that he brings to a property like that, that's definitely an exception that we've made. But for the work that I oversee and the work we've done recently with a lot of our television series, like for Netflix and Peacock and Hulu and Amazon and the like, we really do rely on those people and talent and translators that are located in the country. There's a lot of times people will hear about what I do and they'll think, okay, I work in Los Angeles. There's recording studios all across Los Angeles, and there's Latin Spanish speakers there's tons of amazing Latin Spanish speakers and talent here in Los Angeles. There's some studios that do Latin Spanish dubbing in Miami as well. And I think one of the questions I honestly get asked a lot is, "Oh, do you record the Latin versions in LA or Miami?" And we specifically go to Mexico City because we want to go. One, there's a whole other conversation to have about
Right.
Neutral Spanish and how trying to be far-reaching and reaching those people across Latin America, but and there's going to be certain products where if that product is based in a certain country in Latin America, you're going to go to that country. But generally speaking, a standard kind of dub that you need Latin Spanish on, we're going to go to Mexico City because that's a huge market for recording and specifically for that language. And it's people and talent and contributors that are living and breathing that evolving language as it's growing.
I love that. I mean, I think that's remarkable. I really do. So let's keep going. One of the topics, everyone's going to chuckle because it's in every Facebook group has anything to do with voiceover. One of the things that is near and dear to the U.S. voice actors' hearts are rates. Now, obviously, not every country you work with over 30 is going to have a rate system anything like ours. So can you speak to how, one, I know rates, you paying fairly is very important to you, but also can you talk about how the rate system works in other countries, how the buyout thing, kind of the pros and cons of that?
No, I'm just kidding.
Thanks for showing up, folks. We'll see you later.
I think the honest answer why I can't speak to that is because that's another area where we rely on the studios that we partner with in those countries. I don't do any recordings here in the States, so I don't work with SAG in any way.
Right.
And I'm taking my version, I'm taking that domestic version and taking it to these 30 plus markets, 30 different countries that all have different unions, all have different requirements, all have different things that to try to keep up on the constant changing renegotiations, where things are at, where it's and you always want to honor the latest and greatest rates and where unions are advocating for the rights and the pay of their members. But we have to we're working in just every part of the globe, and we have to rely on our partner studios to keep us up to date on, or they have to stay up to date on making sure that they're in compliance. You don't want me behind a desk in LA trying to dictate a rate sheet in all these countries that I'm not equipped or have the bandwidth or the staff to truly stay on top of, in the way that's going to take care and respect the talent that are coming in to do this work.
So let me restate it. So when you you go to Mexico City, you would say, here is the film, and they would tell you, here is what our rate system is, here is what we pay our actors, and then you then you agree to that because you're supporting their existing rate system. You're not trying to negotiate it or like real get into that. But I mean, for the most part, you're trying to support whatever that local talent has agreed upon.
With the exception if we put in a star talent or we have a
Right.
budget or marketing gives us a budget for some star talent to come in, with the
Okay.
exception of that, I really don't see the rates because they're built into what I see as like an episodic rate. So we're going to negotiate with the studio for, maybe some song rates for certain categories. Like this is what a chorus and a trio or a solo is going to cost. This is what your base episodic rate's going to be. And all the actual rates themselves, what actually makes its way to the talent, to the actors behind the mic, is really rates that are negotiated and handled by the dub studio that I partner with, and we rely on them in that way. And I don't have visibility to what those are. I know that they're built into the rates I pay, but the
Okay.
directive that I give, and this is a given on every project, is that any rate you give me for an episodic work or a feature, whatever the case may be, you have to make sure that you are paying all the latest and greatest union standard rates. Like there should be no cutting corners in any kind of project that I place with a studio in any country that we work in.
That's excellent. I think that's excellent. Okay, so we spoke previously about the impact the pandemic had on the voiceover industry, and you brought up a couple interesting things to me that absolutely did not cross my mind when everyone, had to. Now you're trying to manage projects overseas, and everyone's in a home studio. Can you kind of tell us what that looked like for you on your end?
Yeah, it's funny. Before the pandemic, you'd always have, pre-pandemic, you would have actors traveling and but you have a pickup line you need to do, and the actor's not available to come to the studio, and but the studio would say like, oh, but they're traveling, they could do it from their hotel room, or they can set up their computer at wherever they're at, and I would always be like, absolutely no, like no, there's no way you can get the same level of quality. You can't protect the content. There's too many security liabilities. I was just adamantly against it. And then with the pandemic, we realized that we would have no content if we, drew that same line in the sand. So we had to be open to it, and the pandemic allowed us to test that out at a scale and level we normally would never, or at least for myself, I would never have been comfortable with. And a silver lining to this horrible pandemic that we went through, and I don't want to take anything away from what we've all experienced the past 3 years, but one aspect or one silver lining you could say about it is, at least specific to our work here, is it showed me that you can obtain the same level of quality with the setups that so many of these talent have in their homes and the like. You can send out content and have it done securely without, we didn't have on DreamWorks, we didn't have a single security leak or a single clip that was leaked online or anything of that nature during the entire pandemic. So all these arguments I was saying of like, you have to be in like a brick and mortar studio, all of those were thrown out the window, and it's only because the pandemic forced us to truly test it out at a major level, at a major scale and volume, and it was successful. And now when I place an order with a dub studio, they'll say to me like, oh, well, this actor is going to be, they love to come in studio, this actor is going to do their lines from in home. And honestly, I tell them, I don't care. You know what, you know the quality I expect. You've proven that you can get me that quality in many different ways through many different types of setups. As long as you can deliver it safely and deliver upon that quality, how you get there, I'm going to trust you in you, the studio that I've hired, to deliver upon that. However works best for your contributors and your talent.
Okay. So let's keep going with that frame of mind. Though home studios have somewhat become of a norm, though, in major markets, I will caveat, are you seeing more back to in-studio recording for major projects in major markets?
That's a great point, and I'm glad you brought up that very topic, because there are, you're not just dealing with workarounds when it comes to what we've been through the pandemic, or just trying to be more accommodating as an industry to voice talent, and being open to recording those voices wherever they may be. But sometimes you're competing against a long history of dubbing that you look at like a France or an Italy or Germany. Like, there's so much traditions when it comes to the dubbing. Like, those actors actually, they want to be in studio. They want that collaboration of in the room with the director, with the engineers, with the adapters, and like France is a great example where they during the pandemic, the dubbing industry was deemed an essential service. And so while all these other industries outside of, say, medical and in this case dubbing as well, they were told you had to work from home, because dubbing was considered an essential service, because you were providing content for people you can't tell people to stay at home and then not provide for them and their families in that way. You have to make sure they can put food on their tables. You have to make sure they can, you know, stay sane as best as we can. We've all lived through the most unspeakable 3 years, and to try to do that without having content as well, especially if you have kids and the like. It's I applaud in markets like France, who kind of looked at our industry in that way. It was kind of a real I don't know. It was a real kind of outside the box way of approaching what we do. But I think it was, I don't know. I think they just put a lot of value in what we deliver to consumers.
So again, with that same train of thought, it's interesting, because again, we've talked about this, that of course, in the United States, we are just overwhelmed with content. And this, to me, your conversation is a friendly reminder that other countries don't have near the content that we do, and that's why dubbing is a thing. But yet it's still kind of getting there in the US. And I'm curious, what your thoughts are on, kind of why dubbing isn't like, it's just not taking hold necessarily. So again, we're talking, for those in the audience, we're talking about taking foreign films and having them dubbed into English. And we're hearing in the industry and panels at conferences, that dubbing is getting more traction. But just as a whole, there doesn't seem to just be a huge call for it the way it is in other countries.
No, you're 100% correct. We don't have, most countries don't have the access to the amount of content that we have in the States. Like, I joke with my own family, and my wife and my kids. It's like we have one what do you call it? Streaming platform, which is Netflix. And I'm missing out on some great shows across Apple and Amazon and Hulu and the like. But I always tell my wife and my kids, like, if we run out of content to watch on Netflix, like, we have bigger problems, and and the reality is, a lot of countries, they don't have access to the amount and the number of platforms that we have. And so dubbing is more prevalent in these countries because they need content from other countries and have it localized into their language in order to give the same kind of access to volume that we have in the States, where in the States we haven't had to rely on outside content coming in. And that's an unfortunate thing, because there's incredible content and stories and filmmaking that's happening outside of the United States, but we don't tap into it just because there's so much at our fingertips as it is. So, but I think with what we've seen with Squid Games and a lot of the work that Netflix has been doing, they're really kind of, I think, expanding U.S. audiences' minds and opening them up to taking in content that they normally would not, because in large part dubbing has made leaps and bounds when it comes to how it's adapted and the timing and the lip sync. But there's still this element of just something feels off when you're watching a dub because of that lip sync, especially with live action. And I think this kind of gets to what you were speaking to, Jen, which is when you grew up and you're familiar with dub content, your brain is trained to kind of accept it. You don't look at it as something that feels off. You just accept it because you've grown up watching content that's been dubbed. But as this is a new process for the US market, it's something that we've really got to, we need more Squid Games and more like great stories and foreign content that will allow US audiences to be open to it, because we have to train our brains to watch a dub. Unfortunately, there's just these anomalies of lip sync that you can never get it perfect without AI.
Okay, so perfect transition before our halfway mark. So before everyone freaks out when we bring up the dreaded 2 letters of AI, this is actually fascinating, guys. Scott shared with me a couple really interesting things about the idea of using AI to manipulate lip flaps. Now we're talking about animation specifically, but first of all, Scott, can you explain what are lip flaps for those who might not know?
I mean, just with like the timing and the sync and what we do when it comes to dubbing.
Just what is it? No, I mean, like if I say lip flaps, that sounds kind of like lingo for dubbing. So what is it?
Yeah, so I think when we are dubbing something, we're creating a time script. So when you're a translator and you're gonna translate a given line, the second marks that the lips start moving in the domestic version to when the lips stop moving, and you have to adapt that line within that time frame.
Yep.
And it's not going to be, the best we can do with dubbing with the technology as it stands right now, and what content creators can afford, is you rely on that timing to make sure that the translation starts when the lips start moving, and the translation or the sentence stops when the lips stop moving. And there's going to be all this movement in between that's part of that anomaly I was talking about. That just It's timed right, but it just feels a little off. And so where we're kind of going with AI, and you're right. I don't want to open up a can of worms, because I don't think of AI as I don't believe in it as far as synthetic voices and replacing voices. I look at it as tools that can help bring to the screen what we're trying to do, expand what we're trying to do. But I'm going a different path than, say, the synthetic voices where you see all the media attention really focused on. For me, where I get excited about AI in my part of the world of dubbing is using technology that almost reanimates the lips to mirror the voice, the foreign voice that's dubbed over it. So when you're watching it, it actually feels like that actor is speaking Italian or German or any language we're bringing it to, even though the original lips are moving to an English voice.
That's very cool. Tell everyone the challenge you had with Kung Fu Panda 3.
Yeah, Kung Fu Panda 3 was something where we actually did it was a co-production with, we had a company set up in China, and it was a Chinese company. It was partnered with DreamWorks Animation, and it was a co-production in that sense. And so we were able to work with them to create a Chinese Mandarin version of Kung Fu Panda, which is, the heart of that movie is centered in the culture, in Chinese culture and lore, and to honor that. Our job is to honor any language that we bring a dub to. So it was really exciting because we were able to actually do a dub that all the lips for Kung Fu Panda were reanimated to match the voiceover work done in China. It was the only market where that was done, where everywhere else it was a traditional dub. But that was the first time, I think, for DreamWorks at a really, big budget major way that we, adapted. We truly did a full adaptation of a dub.
That's wild. That's wild.
But it's caught. You can't do it we could only do it being DreamWorks because it was our animation files. So you could open those
Right.
up, and the people that, do animation and understand, computers way above my head, like they could more easily reanimate the lips because it was all part of the same software and stuff that it's animated on. But, when you're taking something that's like, a live action component or a live action property, and you're dubbing it into German, and then you're trying to, then you have to have a technology that goes in and reanimates the lips, live action lip movement. I mean, that's a whole nother. It's possible, and I've seen examples where it looks fantastic, but it's not at a scale, or the technology is not advanced yet to where I think we'll see it rolled out in a wide way. But I think to really have dubbing and dubbed foreign content take off in the US at the likes of, like, I keep using Squid Games because it's probably the biggest we've seen a dub, take off in our market, in the US market. To see more things like that, one of two things has to happen. You either have to train US audiences to just, go with the anomalies of lips feeling a little off when you watch a dub, or you've got to have technology applied that helps seamlessly make that voice sound like it's coming from that actor.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Okay. Just like that, we've made it. We've
Yep.
made it to the half hour. Wow. So let's do a quick room reset. If you've just joined us, we are VO Booth Besties. Our goal is to help working voice actors get their most important questions answered by industry pros who know. Today, we're joined by Scott McCarthy, who's head of dubbing at DreamWorks Animation. Thanks, everyone down below, for joining us. Hey, JT, I know there's been a lot of chatter happening in the chat, so I want to turn it over to you, and let's see if we can get some more questions answered.
I have a ton of questions. If you want to continue to monitor the chat, and we'll go through these and see if we have time for any more. Okay, so JD asked earlier, as a dubbing pro, how do I connect with your organization?
That's a question first of all, hi JD. It's weird. It's weird to do this and it's like all audio. I think that was the first question I had for Jen. I'm like, is this on video? And she's like, no, it's all audio. So whoever you are, JD, it's a pleasure to meet you. I do get that question a lot, and I wish I had a way to kind of to help in that way, to kind of tell you exactly how to get involved in dubbing at, let's say, a voice actor level. But because I partner with these studios in all the foreign countries, and I rely so heavily on them, they are deciding who they bring in to record. They have their own pools of actors they work with. Some of them have like dubbing academies that are set up to try to find talent. Sometimes they partner with, they're a market that has a huge theatrical, like a stage theatrical market, and so they really work with theater companies to bring voice actors in. Every country feels like they have a different pool of actors that they work with and how they obtain that talent. And we rely on them. I mean, for the major characters for a DreamWorks show, my team is approving the final voice. Well, we'll identify, for example, for a television series, we do a lot of work I do is for Netflix. We'll identify, say, 8 characters. We want to have final approval of that character in all the markets. We don't speak the language, but we're listening for the voice print. We're listening for performance. You can tell a performance even if you don't. You can tell a good performance even if you don't speak the language. And that voice print is so integral to the brand, and the filmmakers chose that voice print for a specific reason. So we want to make sure that we're honoring those choices. So we will pick from 3 different voice tests that the studio puts forward to us, but we don't have any say necessarily of who they pull from to get to those top 3. I just have 3 that ultimately are put in front of my team, and then we make the final selection, or we'll sometimes ask for a recast or to go get another 3 actors, or sometimes it's, this actor's really close, but I'd love to hear, this performer try it a different way to see if they can really, nail the part. But again, it really goes back to leaning heavily on our studios in the market for who is actually how they pull from that pool of actors.
That is fascinating, and it kind of touches on a question that Dana had. She wondered if the actors had followings in their home countries. So I understand the VO market isn't the same as it is here necessarily, but do you find that there are like top names that you see on a regular basis when you do the dubs in other countries?
Like social
Yeah.
media, you mean? Like they're popular on social media? Do you think?
Um,
Well, let me take one stab at answering that, and then we do see, and it's different for every country, but generally speaking, there's most countries have such an established pool of actors that they work with that you do find the same names kind of popping up. Like I have multiple actors where that name shows up on our cast list across many different series, and I try to intentionally, or for that reason, kind of spread out who we partner with when it comes to dub studios. I typically will work with 2 or 3 different studios in every single market around the world, in large part because it's a way to, I don't know. There's some great studios out there, and some have strengths when it comes to say a show with has tons of songs. Others have strengths in other areas of dubbing. So I'm sometimes looking for different things, but it also gives me more access to different pools of actors because every studio kind of has their own database of people they call on.
okay. Um, I personally am fascinated by the translation process. Is it up to the other studio, the studio in the other country, to do the translation and make sure it's as accurate and um, regionally acceptable as it can be?
Absolutely. Like we have to rely heavily on. I mean, we're hiring these dub studios that are based in these countries to kind of be a represent. We're asking them to be our representation for their market. Again, they're kind of carrying that same level of brand protection and responsibility that my team carries. We're asking them to carry that same torch. And there's things that I can't approve when it comes to translations because I don't live in that market. I don't live and breathe the language and the culture.
Right.
But we do ask for certain translations to come back to us that we will approve. We will sign off on a title translation and certain character names or certain iconic phrases that are going to be so integral to that property. And again, we may not understand what that means exactly, but we will ask for a back translation to English.
Okay.
And we want to make sure that they understand the intent of that line or the intent of that title treatment. And I think that's the thing that, especially in dubbing, that people don't always appreciate is there's so much subjectivity that goes into translations. It's such a creative, subjective part of our workflow that most people that aren't in this industry think like, oh, you have a sentence, you can translate it one way. Like, how hard is that? It's like, oh my gosh,
Right.
not just every sentence, but every word can be translated countless different ways. And then how you put it all together. And then on top of that, how you sync it to the timing constraints. Like, it's just the most creative, impressive, crazy part of our workflow. I mean, you could say that about, obviously from the voice actors to the translators to the engineers to the mixers. Like, it's just, I'm always in awe when I see the work goes into every level of this process.
Yeah. And I mean, some things just don't translate well into
Yeah,
another country.
yeah, and that's where
So,
that's where I'm always pushing. Being an in-house dub team at DreamWorks, I have this connection where I can reach out to the filmmakers. And a lot of times what I'm doing is I'm trying to bring them into the process. Like I want them involved. And there's this history where people or filmmakers are always like, yeah, just you guys go localize it. And it's like, I want to go to them and say like, and I do go to them and I say like, if you need to know like the as I mentioned at the beginning, the liberties we have to take with adapting this, because this joke that you wrote only works for a U.S. audience. It's only relevant and known in the U.S. So
right.
we've got to completely change that joke. We're completely changing your script and the intent of that scene or that line in order to adapt it for a given country. And I think when filmmakers realize the types of creative decisions that have to go into adapting their content, all of a sudden they're like, oh, I would like to be involved. And we encourage that. We love that. But there's this educational component that we're missing in our industry for people just to really understand what dubbing is and what goes into it.
Yeah. Now, do you organize dubbing for other studios, or is it specifically, if somebody came to you and said, you do this amazing thing, how do we do it for our studio?
I think we stay within the umbrella of our parent company, NBC Universal. I will sometimes translate or dub, localize some projects for, whether it's Comcast or NBCU or Universal. We've done some like home video work for them. So we've done content even beyond DreamWorks, but it's all kind of within that parent company family.
Okay. Let me see. Carlos had a few questions, and I'm going to try and tie them together to kind of keep it one thing. He's from Colombia, and he said when he visits Mexico, if there's a Mexican movie with a Spanish dub, it's very evident that it's not the right sound for that. So he wants to know how many versions of one picture would be recorded in Spanish with different Spanish accents in Mexico.
This is where I wish I had Will Brown Hernandez, who is our head of creative and oversees all of our casting decisions on my team. But unfortunately, the norm is a Latin Spanish sound, a neutral Spanish sound that's going to be as far-reaching as possible. Because the reality is, for most companies, you got a budget for one version of that language per region, and for a diverse region like Latin America, with except, Brazilian Portuguese, there's a separate version always for that. But when you look at all the Latin cultures and all the different dialects and all the ways that you should be truly honoring that language, or that language, we unfortunately go with a neutral Spanish for most properties, with the exception of when the content asks for a local version that's truly recorded in the country where the content is focused on. And Encanto is from Disney is a great example.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they made sure that was not done in Mexico City intentionally, because if you did it there, you wouldn't be honoring the culture that film was celebrating. So if the content calls for it, we absolutely go to the dialect and to where the language needs to be recorded. But unfortunately, with budgets and what really studios and content creators can afford, you have to kind of go with one language version that can reach the most people.
Okay, and
I hope that answered your question, Carlos. It's something where I wish we could do so much more. Latin Spanish is such a great example of, like, it's not one where you should, it shouldn't be a one size fits all, but we're kind of fighting some norms and industry standards that hopefully we can make some headway with in the future.
And then to follow that up, he also said, so localization will prevent any foreign language U.S. resident voice actors won't have the chance to dub for you here in their home language.
For the studios that we partner with and the stuff that I oversee, like we go to the market, we go to the individual countries and partner with studios locally. But that is not to say that that's the only opportunity. There is, as I mentioned, I was talking about at the start. There's staying with Latin Spanish, like there are Latin Spanish dubbings that are happening in LA. There's some great studios out of Miami. There's and even other languages as well. So there is local dubs and opportunities to dub in a language outside of English, that's still working here within the States. It's not something that I overseas. So in that way, so I can't advise on it, but I know those opportunities are there.
Cool. Thank you. Tara Lynn asked, do you mostly work with English content and translate it into other languages, or do you have work coming from other countries that you're also dubbing into English?
No, it's a great question. And for me, for DreamWorks, because we are a US production company, we're creating everything here at our Glendale facility. Certainly on the theatrical side, we do partner with some animation studios around the world on television side, but we're creating a U.S. version just because we're a U.S. company. So everything we're doing is made for a domestic market here in the States, and then it's localizing the languages from there. DreamWorks itself doesn't go and license other animation necessarily and then bring it to a U.S. market. But there's a lot of that happens at our parent company where, they will, NBC is a much larger company that owns DreamWorks, and they have, they've got to populate a Peacock streaming service as well, and they're licensing stuff, and there's a lot of, and within my parent company, there's a lot of, crossover beyond just going from English to a foreign language.
Okay. Rebecca wants to know, we're going back to when you were talking about working with other unions in other countries and, the pay scales and such. She wants to know, why not work with SAG?
Just because I don't do any recordings here in the States.
Okay. Makes sense.
I think it's as simple. But we are working with the SAG equivalent in every country we go to. Everything we do, we're giving that directive that you need to be following every standard rate that the unions, require, and that is in compliance with all the standard rates that are established.
Okay, and I've got one more from Shamika. I know people are trying to get voice actors that match a character's race, but can people of color voice white characters now?
Yeah, I think that, it's about, representation is so important in everything we do. And I think it's about using casting decisions respectfully. And you first and foremost want to honor what is on screen and the intent of the story and the characters, and using your cast and using language and using dialects. You have so many tools to honor and respect the content. And I think I think there's no set rule, if that makes sense. And I think that if anything, we have gotten to a place where, we are using so many tools to bring representation to what we do. And I think it's going to be this evolving thing that we are constantly making sure that it's properly represented.
All right, NJ, we've got about 10 minutes left. Do you have any new questions from the chat?
No, I think we can kind of do some tie-up questions here. So can you tell us quickly about, well, not quickly, take your time. We're in a hurry. This has been amazing. The Entertainment Globalization Association, what it is, and then this award ceremony that you're the chair for.
Yeah, so the EGA is it's an association for our industry. There's a couple others like it, but I've been involved with the EGA. I was the vice president for one term, and then I stayed on as chair of this awards committee, and we're bringing the first localization awards to our industry. That's going to be, how do I say this? Like, it's not the first in the sense that a lot of the major countries have their own localization or dubbing awards, and where they honor that our industry, this craft. But there's not necessarily something that is hosted here, from Los Angeles, that is honoring all languages. So you can actually, it's not just a German dubbing awards. They have a really great prominent one over there called the Synchronies. But what we're trying to do with the Hermes Awards, that's the name of our show, is you will actually have a best performance, and you'd have a Japanese, going up against a Latin Spanish versus up against a nominee that's from Romania, and it's like it's incredible to see the breadth of countries that are represented in every category, from performance to mixing to audio descriptions. Yeah, so I'm excited about that. It's the first time we're pulling it off. We haven't pulled it off yet, so talk to me again after March 30th when the awards show actually goes out. But we just wrapped up the submission window. We're in the reduction voting process right now, so we're doing the final reduction from all the submissions down to the final 5 nominees per category. It'll go to the EGA membership for a final vote beginning of February, and then we'll have our awards show at the end of March, on March 30th. And it's just been, sometimes it's felt like my full-time job trying to get this thing off the ground, but I'm really excited about it, and I think it's a way that we can honor our industry and to do it in a truly international way.
And what makes it unique is that, and you had mentioned this to me, and I thought it was actually a really fantastic point, is that dubbing is often viewed as post-production. Is that accurate?
Yeah, and I think for me, it's just part of the work I want to do, just to kind of advocate for our industry and to
Right.
educate our industry about what we do and the importance of dubbing. And dubbing has always been, I think the worst thing that's happened to dubbing is that it's been grouped in with post-production, because it's not really post-production, but
Right.
it's also not production. It's this bridge that kind of connects the two. But when you treat it as just a post-production element, it seems like it's a box you check to say, like, oh, I'll take this language, and this language. I'll take some English closed captions and throw some audio descriptions on there. And it's this menu ordering way of doing it. And it needs to be seen as something where there's an art to it, and there's a craft, and there's just, it's something that needs to be
Celebrated.
celebrated.
Yeah,
That's the perfect way to say it. And
yeah.
so I think that's what this award show is trying to do.
Wow, that's fantastic. So, do you have any advice, if you can, for voice actors as they navigate their career, or just maybe some mentoring advice? You are in the thick of it. You're in LA. You're at one of the hottest animation studios.
Yeah, I know. I would go back to. I'm going to bring up a post that you put out on social media, Jen, which was your Just Ask post.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people. I mean, we're connected. I'm talking with you guys today because of the simple fact that you reached out to me and just had some questions, and we connected. And I think most people are sometimes afraid just to reach out and ask, and I try my best to get back to everyone who reaches out to me, and it's I'm not always great at it, but I try my best. And I don't know, you just need to put yourself out there. And I think the difference is, or the caveat to that is, you can't come at it from a place of, I'm trying to get work from you. If it really needs to come at it about making a connection, because the work will come with the more connections that you make. So if you reach out to someone without this feeling of, I want something from you, you'll be surprised how many people will open their doors to you. And I think that that is a tool that a lot of people don't utilize, and I wish more people would. And I think it's the best thing you can do for your career. And you got to remember, I think we've joked about this, Jen. It's like, especially with people in LA, it's like, the reality is, people in LA love to talk about themselves. So if you just ask to say, will you just tell me your story? How did you reach your this point in your career? How did you get from point A to point B? Like, they're almost always willing to tell you their story, but you've got to approach it in the right way.
I thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Guys, everyone below, please take note. And so when you see my post going, come on, be brave, just ask, just make the connection. This is how Scott and I met, and we've already built a friendship. And again, in all networking and all relationships, you go into it without expectation. Don't go into it expecting a reward or, like he said, an immediate job. That was perfect. JT, I'm going to send it over to you the last little bit.
All right. Thank you so much. Scott, we are thrilled that you were here. And oh my goodness, I know so much more than I did. And I also feel like there's so much I don't know. But before we let you go, we like to ask our guests 3 for fun questions, kind of James Lipton style. So, Scott, our first question is, what singer, band, or composer are you enjoying most right now?
I would say an artist by the name of Citizen Cope.
Okay.
He is the first kind of singer songwriter or like musician I went to see once the world kind of started to open up again after the pandemic, or we started to live with it. So it was the first concert I went to. He's someone I've been a big fan of going back decades now. And it's what I love about him is he's just got this breadth of influences from blues to rock to reggae to even like a country. So a little tip for people that are interested in learning about him, he's perfect to plug in when you're on Pandora or you're trying to create like a Apple Music station where you just like, pick an artist and they do a collection of songs based on that artist. So
Yeah.
you put him in there. He's got so many different influences that he gives you the most unique variety of music in a channel. And so, I think he's great for people to just, take in on his own because he's just incredible. But to also to also use him to build a Pandora like station is also a trick I love to utilize.
Very cool. I'm going to have to check that out because I hate when my stations just start sounding the same.
Yes.
All right. Our second question is, what podcast have you been listening to lately?
I would say my favorite podcast would be Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend.
Nice. That's fun. And our final question is, what is your favorite dessert?
My favorite dessert would be cake, any type of cake, really. I have 2 daughters at home, and so luckily I have people that will help me eat cake now. But for the longest time, my wife does not like cake. She hates it, and I don't get me started. I don't know why. It's weird, but she doesn't like it. So people used to give me a cake, or if I get something for my birthday, and then I'd be the only one eating it, and it's just. And I have this thing about throwing out food, so I would eat the whole thing, and it's not good. So I'm actually happy I have these 2 daughters that help me with that now.
Nice.
Oh my God. I'm dying because I love angel food cake, and nobody in my family, and I've got 2 kids and a husband, and they don't like angel food cake. And so I'm the same way, Scott. I end up making whatever my kids want to eat. And I'm like, oh, happy birthday to me. We'll eat your cake, because otherwise I'm like in there, like trying to work my way through an entire cake. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. Anyway, okay. I digress. That was awesome. So, guys, as a reminder, VOBB, we're here to educate. And I think Scott is a fantastic speaker, and we are so appreciative you are here because, again, we get a lot of misinformation in the industry, or maybe just not quite the whole truth. And so when we're literally hearing from someone who is head of dubbing at DreamWorks Animation, we're cutting through the noise. We're giving you the answers you want. And with that being said, it shouldn't have to be said, but Scott is not a casting director, so his focus is on localization. Sending him your demo will be poor form. So please don't do it. It sounds like Scott is open to connecting with you, maybe on LinkedIn, but guys, let's use our VO etiquette. Thanks again, Scott, for joining us, and everyone in the audience below, thank you. It was so great that you were here. So, you guys, we want to be mindful of your time. Thanks again for joining us. Next week, we will have Deborah Sperling, who is a voice actor and coach, discussing authenticity. Let's try that again. I speak for a living. Authenticity in voiceover. Head over to boothbesties.com and you could submit your questions there for us to include them in the interview. And to keep the conversation going, as usual, connect with us on LinkedIn and VOBB on Facebook and Instagram. And I think that's it.
Thank you all so much. Have a great night.
Thank you guys for coming. Thanks, Scott.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening to another episode of VO Booth Besties.
Be sure to subscribe to our podcast. Well, pretty much anywhere they're playing podcasts.
And follow us on Instagram and Facebook so we can keep the conversation going.
VO Booth Besties.
Yeah, it's a thing.